Hello and welcome to this video on the Antonov An-225. So what are we going to be covering in today's video? Well, we're once again standard parked on stand 101 in Leipzig, and we're going to be focusing on the EFB interactions and some other little things around the aircraft. But that's really what we're going to look at, because there's quite a lot of things in there and we want to take a deeper look at the loading and unloading system and how that's all done. So let's get straight onto it. Alright, here's the EFB. As you can see, it's got my departure and my arrival routing in there. Because I've used the world map, then it will show that. And also we can see the live weather here, and you can refresh it if you need to. Why do I have a load plan from GPS button? Well, what this is for is if you haven't used the world map and you have put a route into the Garmin, then you can load that plan into the GPS. So let's, for example, say that I just loaded here with nothing from the world map, and then I manually typed in EDDP, EDDF, and put all the stuff in manually, but I want to get that route into the EFB, so I have all this nice weather things. Then you can click that, and it will load it in here. We also have a quick option to go to the cargo, and we have the ready to fly button. Now, if we click ready to fly, the aircraft will automatically be started up, and it's the quickest way to get going from on stand. It will turn the engines on, and normally they take around 6 minutes, but this only takes about maybe less than a minute to get the whole thing up and going. So that's what we have on this page. Next, we're going to move on to the ground tab. Now this is probably the main one, to be honest. So we have some options. We've got GPU, chocks, which we're going to put on. So when the GPU is selected available, you'll be able to select it from the electrical panel on the rear. And when the chocks are set, they're obviously set, but they do not function. They're just visual, simply because we're trying to keep as much functionality with the default systems at the moment. Doors, going to come back to that momentarily. Then we have these other ones. So we have cabin door, internal door. What are these? So the internal door is that big door that leads between the flight deck and the cargo area. So it's like that, looks like a fridge door. And the cabin door is the one that's on the left side of the plane that opens up to allow you to walk in and out of the aeroplane as a crew member. And actually when it kneels, the sort of bottom ladder thing goes up as well. What is this lighting control? Well, all the other lighting in the flight deck is controlled by its associated lights and knobs and things like this, which we will go through. But this one here controls the cargo bay, so the underneath part. And the passenger area lighting is the area behind the flight deck and up to the curtain. So that's what these lights, this is the only way to turn the lights on there. This we're going to go through after we've gone through the main door. So when I click main door, what will happen is the front main cargo door will start to lift up, and the whole process of kneeling the aircraft will commence. But I want to talk about a few things before we get onto that. So we're going to jump to the options menu now. Why are we going to do this? Well, we're going to talk about the options that are on here, and then we're going to go back to the ground tab. First of all, nose door movement speed. Now this is that main door, the main loading door speed, and it by default is set to fast, which means it takes around about 1 minute to open and close. Well, not open, to open, kneel, and get the whole thing ready to go. Maybe a bit longer. In realistic, it takes around about 4.5 or 5 minutes. It seems pretty slow, but it's based on the real aircraft speed. So this is up to you, whatever you want to have set. Now, let's go to the other side and see what that's all about. Top one, we have localization. So English or Cyrillic. So what's this about? Well, I'm going to move around the flight deck and try and show you now. So if you have a look, we have it set to English. That's the default option. But you'll notice this isn't in English. A lot of the flight deck is not in English. So initially you might be like, well, how am I supposed to know where things are and what I'm supposed to do? Of course, you can use the in-sim checklist system, and that guides you through it. But at the moment, I have the lock interaction mode, so the normal mode, and I have my tooltips on. You can see that everything has an English or your local language tooltip. So that one's just set to blank because it's a bait mode, and this here will show you everything else. So that's one of the easiest ways to work around the aircraft, is to make sure you have this interaction mode set, and then you'll be able to read what all these knobs do. So what does the English do? Well, let's have a look at the Autopilot panel. This is now in English. And if we check this to Cyrillic, then you can see this now changes back to its original language. So this is how the An-225 came from the factory. Now I'm just going to very quickly put the batteries on. Okay, so the batteries are now on, and can you see, we can cancel the flashing here. If I go a bit closer, this is the original language of the aircraft that it came with, and of course, because these are lights, they can't be tool-tipped. So there's no way to know what they say. So if we go back to the EFB, set this to English, you will see that all of these now are in English. So we can understand that that's saying engine 1 failure, throttle control, critical mode, and most importantly, this overhead panel also tells us what there is to do. So that's what those options do in the EFB, and I hope that makes sense, but do highly recommend having the tooltips on when flying this aircraft. Of course, unless you can read the native language, then perfect. You can just set it to Cyrillic and off you go. Everything should make sense like as intended. Okay, so what does this weight units do? Well, this is just for the iPad, because the weight and balance tab, the default one in the sim, is going to listen to your in-sim options. But let's, for example, say we go to the Payload tab. Can you see how this is all in kilos, 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 which is how the aircraft came? But if we set this to Imperial, then the payload is all in pounds. So that's all that option does, and I'm going to leave it in kilos. Autopilot altitude window, 1s and 100s. What's that? Well, it's pretty easy to explain. I'll show you. So this is the primary way that you set your altitude. Now it's in meters, and as you can see with the hundreds, each scroll means I can go up 100 meters at a time. So let's take a classic example, right? Let's say that we were going to climb up to a normal cruise altitude of, say, 10,000 meters. So you can see that, look, it doesn't actually take all that long, or you can just drag it like this. So I can go, all right, let's drag this and scroll it one more, 10,000 meters. It was easy enough, right? Now let's try again if we set it to 1s. Now each movement does 1. So I think you get the idea. You're going to be there a while. So this really allows that fine adjustment. It defaults to 100s because then you can easily set it. Then if you want to change the units to 1s, you can do that, and you can very precisely set your cruise altitude in meters, because often you're not going to be cruising at sort of a round number, because ATC are going to ask you, hey, please can you cruise at 36,000 feet or 33,000 feet or whatever. You're going to have to work out, well, how many feet is that? And I need to put that amount of meters in that window. So that's what that option does. We'll come to how to make that easier later. That's everything from the options tab. We're now going to move back to the ground tab and go through the door. Okay, so let's open the main door. So when we press main door, you can see these progress bars start to move. So this is showing you how far through the procedure the aircraft is. So it goes door, so the main door comes open, then the legs come down, they're these little legs by the main landing gear, then the aircraft will kneel, so it's going to go like this, and then it's going to kneel down, and then we'll physically see the aircraft tilt, and then the ramp will come down. Now, we talked about this in one of the tutorial series videos, but I'm going to highlight it again here. If you're keeping your camera fixed in this position and you're not going to move it, what's going to happen is when the kneeling starts, the camera is going to stay in this position, but the plane is physically going to kneel down. So it's going to look like the plane is sort of moving below you. Now, there's not much we can do about that because we cannot tie the camera to the physical part of the aeroplane. So what we've done is when it gets past a certain position, it's automatically going to swap to a lower camera view looking at the EFB, allowing you to sort of just not do anything, and it should work out fine. The one time where this won't work out is if you go, for example, on the outside view and then you jump back in, your camera is going to be slightly above the cockpit now. All you have to do is just move your head down into the cockpit and then you're good to go. Or you know, that's it. It's not the biggest deal in the world. It's just something to be aware of. So here we can see it's kneeling down, right? And the actual aircraft is physically moving down below us. So that's just a thing to be aware of. Well, you might say to us, why did you include this? And I think it's such a core aspect of what makes the AN225 the AN2. We had to include it, even if it's a little bit awkward with the camera system while doing this. So just try and stick with it. And of course, you don't have to open the door if you don't want to with a flight. You can use the in-sim default payload manager, which is up here. This is always available, and that you can just set your payload through there if you wish. So this is more of a if you want to do it, and that's what we're going through on today's video. So when the ramp is fully unloaded, we're going to hop back in and we're going to talk about the EFB payload section. All right, so you can see the ramp is closing up now. Now, can you see that we have unload cargo and load cargo are now available? So when the door isn't open, so you don't have to wait for the full process to finish, but as long as the main door is closed or in the process of opening, so just this one here, you cannot change the payload via this menu. You can do it at all times via the default system. Let's have a look. So we have a truck. This is a full-size, like American-style semi-truck, as they'd call them, or a lorry if you're from the UK. Don't worry about it. Then we also have 2 fire trucks, airport fire trucks. We have a maglev train. We have 3 helicopters, and we have a boiler. Those are the payloads. Each of them have a different weight, and each of them have a different distribution of weight. So actually, you will notice your center of gravity will change ever so slightly, but most of these are loaded in the middle, so or as close to the middle as you can get. So there's not too much change of center of gravity, but that's how they do it in the real aircraft as well. This one, by far the heaviest. I can't remember it, but it's over 120, 130 tons. So this one, watch out for, basically. So, what procedure do we need to load this equipment in? Well, what we need to do is, let's say we're going to take, let's pick a payload. So we took the train for that payload. Let's take the boiler because it's very heavy. So if we click load cargo, can you see how the plane sort of wobbled a bit now? Now the payload is automatically set. So if we go to our payload tab, we can see our current aircraft weight is 550 tons basically. That's a lot. And it has the cargo weight here, 140 tons, so I wasn't too wrong. Now this gives me an opportunity to show you that we have a quick option, so we can just go back. Let's change it to the helicopters, and let's go on the payload. So now my payload weight is 17,000 kilos. So that shows you a confirmation. The numbers that are in this are always correct. These read directly from the simulator variable for weight, so these can be trusted at all times. So let's go back to what we wanted. So first of all, we need to load this, and now we can adjust the fuel in the system here. So we're going to set this to kilos, and you can just drag the bar to whatever you need. Now let's talk a little bit about fuel planning. So this is a very, very rough rule because it is difficult to get information on it. There is a SimBrief profile available to the 225, but if you want some basic numbers, it uses a roundabout 20,000 kilos an hour. So it's not going to use that in the cruise, but that's taken into account taxi, takeoff, engine run up, climb out, getting in the cruise, and then cruising a bit lower than that, and then taking up a bit more fuel when we arrive, etc., etc. So 20 tons is good enough for an hour, and then 40 tons is good enough for 2 hours, etc., etc. And the aircraft can take up to a maximum of 305,000 kilos. That's what we have set, that's a lot of fuel. That's a lot of fuel. So, recap. You set your payload using the EFB, if you wish, and then you set the fuel in here. And I'm just going to show you, for example, I'm going to adjust it down to, say, I don't know, 20,000. So 30,000 each side, so 40,000 in total. Now you might say to yourself, this number here doesn't match the number that's on the EFB. It doesn't. Now, unfortunately, that's because the payload that we're setting here isn't actually being updated on that weight and balance tab. But these numbers here, remember, trust these numbers. So now we've got the right amount of fuel and we've got the right amount of payload, giving us a takeoff weight of 401,000. That's pretty heavy, but also pretty light in comparison to the maximum takeoff weight. So That's how you would do it, and if you wanted to go, you'd close the door and off we would go. But we're going to look a little bit more in depth at the other payload options. So what we're going to do is we're going to unload the cargo. So now we have no cargo loaded, and we're going to click on the Payload tab. Now this allows you to do custom flights. So if you want to just go, no, I don't want those pre-made payloads, I want to simulate a historic flight that I've seen from it, or anything you want, that's absolutely fine. So what you can do here is you can set the passengers. So we're going to set them here, set them there. Now this is for the rear passenger area and the forward passenger area behind the flight deck, because the flight crew are taken into account always in the sim. So you can set this and it sets some appropriate weight. Here you can set weight that goes into your rear, main and forward area. Now of course be careful, because you can put the aircraft outside of limits, but you know, that's realistic. And the rear always has a bit more of a rear bias to its center of gravity due to just how it was designed initially, other than the Ruslan is a bit more forward. So there's always a bit more of the rear wouldn't always be the limiting factor, not so much the forward. So let's make an example. So I'm going to put in how much am I going to put in? That's 100. Well, you can do super heavy payload, so 180, but let's just go in the middle and let's just do some at the front like this. So there you go. And now I click apply load, and now we can see our current weight has been updated. Our fuel weight is stayed the same because we haven't adjusted the fuel, so it's all good. And we can check to see if our center of gravity, so our center of gravity is 30.6 and the aft limit is 42. You can always adjust this slider here if you want to manually play with your center of gravity, but let's just show you that, for example. So if I take the weight away, I click apply load, see how this has now gone more aft. And we can also minimize this, and let's just put a bit of weight in the back, click apply payload, and we're already at 36% max. So you can start to see how you can get that rear limit, not easily, but you know, reasonably. So let's reset this. So we're going to go back to this. We're just going to click load cargo, and now we can see, look, boom, it's loaded. The center of gravity here is correct and true. And on our payload tab here, this is what weight we have is, and we can confirm that by saying, there we go, we've got the 140 and the recognized numbers here, so that's all good. So let's try and set these. Why can't I move the sliders? That's because I need to unload the cargo as I did before, then go to the payload tab, and now these sliders are unlocked. So if you have a payload in there, it's not going to allow you to adjust it. It gives you a little warning message. But let's talk a little bit about the boxes, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So there's these 3D looking boxes, this cargo. Now that you might be like, well, why is that always showing? That will show if it detects that there's a payload in the aeroplane. So if there's no payload in the aeroplane at all, the cargo area will actually be clear, completely empty. But you can only get to that by setting 000 here and then clicking apply load. Or using the weight and balance menu here, because by default the sim loads in some payload, so it shows the boxes. That's why they're there all the time. We're getting there, we're nearly there now. So I'm just going to reset it to how we wanted, load the cargo, that's all fine. Let's go on the weather. Pretty self-explanatory, shows the departure, arrival. We can go on details, and this is a bit of a breakdown to show you the weather, not so much in a METAR form, but in more of a pictorial form. And then we can also do custom lookups. So you see how it says aircraft disabled? This is because we need to type one in. So for example, let's go EGLL, and then we click search, and you can see that message goes away, just to show us that, hey, you're not interacting with the EFB anymore. All right, let's move on to the converter. So remember earlier we were talking about the meters on the autopilot panel. Let's do a practical example. Air traffic control have told you to climb to an altitude of 32,000 feet, so flight level 320. So you read back, right? Okay, you need to climb to 32,000 feet. That comes out as that. Okay, good. So let's put this in 100s. Let's go back on the converter. Great, so 9753.6. That sounds like 9754 to me. So now I'm going to go like this. 9, 7, and then remember, you need to just quickly do this. 5, 4. There we go. And that's our flight level 320. And we did that without having to Google anything or go anywhere. And the converter can do all, kilos to pounds, knots, miles per hour, everything, because all airspeed indicators. This one is in kilometers per hour. Let's quickly go through some of these. So this is in kilometers per hour, meters again, meters, climb rate, and all this other stuff. The one that's pretty funny is Mach, right? So there's actually a Mach gauge here. It doesn't work, but it's fitted into the aircraft for type certification reasons only, but it's over the shoulder of the captain. Yeah, pretty funny. The standby instrument, so this one here, this will actually show feet and knots. So if you're ever unsure of what your altitude is, you can look at this altimeter here, this is in feet, or you can look at this screen here, which also shows feet and knots. Also on the navigator's panel, one of these, shows feet, and then this one is Mach as well. Sorry, this one's Mach. There we go. 0.8, 0.6, 0.7, 0.9. So there's plenty to choose from. Just, this converter really helps. And the final thing I'm going to go through on the converter is this odd one. You might say, what is mmHg? Well, remember, we've got inches of mercury, so that's like 2992 for in America for standard pressure. So let's type that in, 29.92, and click off it. And that comes out as 1013 hectopascals, fair enough. But it also comes out as basically 760 millimeters of mercury. Now that's what these metric altimeters use, see? So this is how you set it here. So if you're ever wondering what on earth is this unit and what does it correspond to, well, here you go, you can find out here. And then options. So we're back beginning. So this is basically everything. If we go back to the dashboard, so now we go back to the dashboard, you can see this is the quick option to take us here. And I'm going to close the door again now. So now you can see the ramp is starting to go up. It's going to unkneel and close everything else. Alright, that was a full overview of the EFB. I hope it didn't seem too confusing. Because we tried to make it as simple as possible, but obviously there's quite a lot of things going on here. So just review this if you need to go through everything. Okay, so you join me in a darker twilight time because we're going to cover where all the different lamps are located on the AN225. So let's do that now. First of all, let's take a look at this left side here. We've got this one here, which is like a floodlight on the captain side only. This is VSI TCAS for their display on their side, and this one does the integrated backlighting. This one up here is sort of like a storm light, I think you could describe it. It's like a brighter dome, like a brighter light on this side. Moving across to the first officer side, fairly similar setup here. We've got this one here, which is integrated for that side, and then we have a flood lamp, and then we've also got this one here, which is the brighter flood lamp for this side. Up here we have this switch which says day night, so that's like the integrated night lighting for the panel here. So if it's in day it's off, if it's in night time then it comes on. Alright, so moving from the captain's position here over to the engineer's panel, we've got this lamp here. So this is like a, what would you call this? It's like a flood lamp for the middle. It's these sort of overhead bits here. This one is the integrated lighting for this whole rear back panel here. And this one here, this is personally one of my favorite ones, does these spill lamps that come down here, which look really, really cool when it's at night time. So I'm going to leave those illuminated. On this side here, we have this one here, which is more of these sort of spill lights on this side. And this one does the integrated for the whole back panel here. So it's this one and this one on this side. I'm going to leave this a little bit up, and this one also turned a little bit up as well. Neatly, we have this little thing here. It's like a little desk lamp. I'm going to put it on. You can actually even see there's a sort of a coffee stain going on there. And remember we said that these rear lights are turned on by the EFB. And you can see here, looking into the flight deck with these lamps set, it looks fantastic at night. It has a really, really interesting sort of feel about it. It really doesn't feel like a flight deck to me. It's just so well lit everywhere, and there's so many different stations, so many different things going on. But yeah, that's basically an overview, quick overview of the lighting controls for the AN225. Okay, so let's talk about cruise levels, speeds, and things like that with the Antonov. So some very basic rule of thumb planning. The aircraft, so the 225, can go all the way up to 36,000 feet. That's actually pretty good. It can fly up to Mach 0.78, which also is, for the plane that it is, pretty impressive. If you weigh maximum weight, so that's 640,000 kilos, you are not obviously going to be able to go up to your maximum cruising altitude. A very rough rule of thumb, I would say if you're around 450,000 kilos, something like that, you can probably make it up to 36,000 feet. Of course, if you're, say, 500,000 kilos, maybe consider 33,000, something like that. And if you're over 500,000 kilos, I would keep it at about 30,000 feet, so flight level 300. That's probably pretty good. And it can get up there, I would imagine, even at maximum weight, it could get up to about 30,000 feet. The final part of the climb is always a bit more of a struggle, because it's got quite a bit of thrust, but of course when you get up to that higher level you start to lose a lot of the thrust, and of course the aircraft has a fair bit of drag considering its frontal shape, size, area, and the wing is incredibly thick, so it starts to get a lot of extra drag from that. So it's just something to be aware of. Next we're going to move on to looking at some of the autopilot modes that we didn't show off in our tutorial flight. So we're just going to show you how to intercept a radial, and also how you can use the Mach mode, so Mach Stabilization, in the climb and in the cruise. Okay, here we are in the aircraft, and I want to try and show you how you can lock onto a radial. So how do we do that? First of all, we need to make sure we have our frequency set. So we're going to be going for the 115.850, and we have that set here on our nav panel, which is on the navigation station. And then you can see that identifies as Leipzig, LEG. That makes sense. On this one we have the Dresden, the 11435, so that's behind us and slightly to the other side. So now we must make sure we have this set. Distance wise makes sense. So if we have VOR2 selected, we're going to have the wrong thing shown here, but we have VOR1, so that's what we want to lock onto. We're in the VOR1 mode, so we must be on VOR1 if we're intercepting VOR1, which we are, so the frequency is on number 1, and we want to track the radial to VOR number 1, and then we can arm the lateral mode for that. So remember that this is the button that arms the appropriate thing laterally for that mode. So I'm going to arm that now, and there we go. Can you see this has just come alive, so I kind of timed that well. I press the button and it starts to turn inbound. So you can see it's closing in, and that's what it's doing. You can see that the wing level light and sort of has gone out, and so has the light here. Now, the reason that that went out is because the wing leveler mode is no longer enabled, because it's tracking inbound to the VOR. Now this pointer here, now what does this point to? This is sort of this lower row will point this arrow to whatever you want it to. So for VOR1, now you can see it's pointing towards the station, which is correct. And if I do VOR2, see how it's kind of pointing this way, which is where the Dresden is. And you can also do the same thing for ADF1 and ADF2. They'll also use a pointer, and this top row does the main display. So let's imagine that we want to now go back into wing level mode. So if we press wing level, it's going to completely stop tracking that radial. So you can see it's not going to make any more corrections. Wing level light comes on, and wing leveler comes on as well, and that's what it's going to do. Now in the real Antonov 225, this was something that we learned from Antonov themselves. This is how this mode should work. This was how it was intended to work, but it actually, like the auto thrust, was never finished, and they intercept this using heading. So if you want to be 100% authentic, you would put it to course 1, and you would do this manually with heading, just so you know. So just to review, if you want to lock onto something, you make sure it's tuned, you make sure that you have the course set. If you want to lock onto VOR number 1, you make sure you're in VOR number 1. If you want to lock onto VOR number 2, so the thing that you've put in nav2, you make sure that you have VOR2 selected here, and then you press this to arm, and it will then capture the correct course that you have set. And you make sure that you have everything displayed here appropriately. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the other modes that we have with the autopilot. So let's go back down to course 1, and remember we said that the heading, this is how we can adjust the heading. So if I adjust heading, I don't know, let's say to the right slightly, and I click like this, that's how it's going to lock onto the heading. So if this is the appropriate lateral mode for course 1. But if I click wing level, you see how it then immediately rolls wings level and disregards our last command. So the wing leveler button will always just level the wings. That's what it's there for. Let's imagine that we are in the approach mode, and remember, when we're in the approach mode we can no longer adjust our heading, which is a bit awkward, because let's imagine that ATC have asked us, hey, actually I need you to turn a further right to heading 030 degrees. So we can by all means set that here with 030, but we can use the bank selector. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this to bank, so 0 degrees, and I'm going to flick this a little bit like this, just till we get to, I don't know, let's say 10 degrees of bank, something like that. No, that'll do. So now you can see I have 15 degrees of bank, and now the aircraft's going to start to bank, and I can do this while in the approach mode. So here we go, we're coming up to 030, and now I'm going to bank it back again, a little bit less. They kind of do this in flicks, and there we go. Look, we're on heading 030. So I made a heading adjustment by using this bank mode at the top, if that makes sense. It's it can be a bit awkward, but it's a way to do it. So what else can I show you? We've covered navigation, we've covered VOR1, VOR2, course 1 and course 2 do the same thing, but course 1 is the one you should use for the heading. And yeah, that's about it. So I think what we're going to do now is just show off Mach Stabilization, and that'll be the end of the video. Alright, here we are at the cruise, and we are stabilized using our indicated airspeed. So remember, we press this button here, and this is speed stabilization in indicated airspeed. Now that can be very useful, but when we get to the higher levels, we might actually want to be stabilized in Mach. So how do we do that? So let's imagine this situation. We've leveled off here, and we want to maintain Mach point, let's say 7.2, something like that. So we could, of course, just increase our airspeed up till we get this Mach point 7.2 written in the middle here, or 7.2 or 7.3 or whatever we want. But that changes with temperature and altitude and can kind of get very awkward having to always fiddle with these numbers. So what we can do is we can say, no, actually I'm going to stabilize it with Mach. So how do I do that? A few ways. One of them I'm just going to talk about, and the other one we're going to do. You could just increase this number up until we get the appropriate Mach, and then press this button here, and the light will flash, and then it will hold the Mach number. It doesn't actually indicate to you anywhere that it's doing it, but it is holding a Mach number when you do that. The other way is the way that they would do it in the real aircraft. So what we can do is we can take the auto thrust off, increase thrust up, so just do it a little bit. So let's increase the thrust up a bit more, something like that. Remember, we can view our Mach number here, so we're going to go 7.2, 7.3, something like that. So we can see a digital readout of our indicated airspeed here and our Mach number there. This is irrelevant now, just going to do that to prove to you that it's not doing anything. So we're at 7.2, let's increase it to 7.3. So there we go with 7.3. So now I'm going to stabilize that Mach. I'm going to put my auto thrust back in. Now, do you see how if it was still following this airspeed here, the auto thrust would go whoa, and it would bring the thrust all the way back now, and would try and maintain this indicated airspeed. It's not doing that because I told it, hey, I want you to stabilize the speed based on Mach 0.73, which is exactly what it's doing, see? So it's maintaining Mach 0.73, and it will continue to do that now for the rest of the flight. So you can basically just stabilize at that speed and off you go. So it's actually quite easy to just increase your thrust with manual thrust, press the button, and then it will stabilize at that Mach number. I think that about wraps it up. I know this video was a little bit of bits that didn't really fit into the other videos, and also an extensive look at the EFB and the loading procedure, but I hope you did enjoy it. I hope it was helpful. I really can't wait for people to get into the sim and be able to fly Maria all over the world. So thank you very much for watching, and once again, can't wait for you to get access to it.